So as part of the lecture series titled Dialogues on Development, the Baha'i Chair for Studies in Development at Devi Ahilya Vishwavidyalaya in Indore is pleased to announce this lecture, which is being delivered by Professor Ritu Dewan, retired professor and director of the Mumbai School of Economics and Public Policy, University of Mumbai, on the theme Labor Rights and Labor Codes, addressing institutionalized inequalities in India. As we know, this is an extremely important theme that requires much greater analysis and understanding in order to really appreciate the implications of social and economic development in India. The promulgation of labor codes, replacing all existing labor laws, has come in for much debate in the past couple of years, particularly in the context of deepening inequalities across several forms of discrimination, including caste, gender, and religion. In the context of these developments and the promulgation of these labor codes in the recent past, this lecture seeks to understand and demystify the impact and implications of these codes for labor structures and rights, both conceptually as well as empirically. To help us do this, our speaker for today, Professor Ritu Dewan, was the first ever woman director of the Department of Economics at the University of Mumbai, and the founder member of the first Center of Gender Economics. She has over 100 publications, including 20 books and monographs. Professor Dewan was a member of the Feminist Economists Group for engendering the 12th and 11th five-year plans, and is closely associated with training and capacity building related specially to gender issues. She has conducted numerous workshops for several state governments, including Jammu and Kashmir, Goa, Tamil Nadu. She is also currently the president of the 64th National Conference of the Indian Society of Labor Economics. Her research focus is linked primarily to issues and concerns of marginalized groups and movements. We are very fortunate to have Professor Dewan to help us unpack and understand this complex issue. We have participants today joining us both on Zoom as well as on Facebook Live, the two platforms where this lecture is being streamed. Participants are requested to please make a note of their comments and questions and to share them through the Q&A box, which is at the bottom of your screen. After the lecture, which we estimate will be around 40-45 minutes, there will be time for taking your comments, and Professor Dewan will comment, will reflect and comment on them. So without taking more time, I would like to invite Professor Dewan to please share her comments.
Thank you so much, Professor Fazli, for the introduction and for inviting me to present this talk. It's a huge issue, and when you first mooted this to me, I really didn't know where to start, because one can do a full 2-month course on exactly what is happening where labor structures and inequalities, etc., are concerned. So I've tried to shorten it as much as I could and reduce it to some level. And also, what I would like to say right in the beginning, earlier I used to say, let's not romanticize the past and demonize the present. But after the introduction of particularly the labor codes, and which I will, of course, be dealing with, and the recent increased inequalities or intensification of inequalities in labor market structures, of course, at an overall level, but even at this level, somehow I really don't know whether to still stick to that phrase of romanticizing the past and not demonizing the present. But I think as we go along and try and demystify and break up what really the codes say, at least one or two of the major codes which I will be dealing with, we realize the situation is becoming extremely problematic. And that the inequalities, what we're talking about, is not, of course, gender, caste, and religion in particular, which has emerged very, very recently as a dividing force, but also the fundamental inequalities between labor and capital. And that's why I've tried to divide the. I'll just share the PPT. Now, of course, I'm not going to read out the PPT, but there are certain basic essentials which are important to understand. And also because there are some kinds of technical definitions, etc., which is very, very important to know. The codes, of course, go into hundreds of pages, and whether it's a state or the center or whatever. But the states have to build in what the center has recommended. So I will be focusing primarily on the central objectives which have been put forward where this is concerned. Now, what I have tried to do is structure and the way I'm going to be presenting, of course, the contextualization, what has been happening and what is currently happening, keeping the basic data in mind and the broad levels of inequalities in a particular context. Uh, Inequality intensification, and this is really, for me, what becomes very important is the institutionalization of inequality, which is really what is represented not only by the labor codes, which I will be taking up after talking about these three or four different kinds of policies, which also impact the majority of India's population, and of course deal with, in the end, I really don't know what to say a conclusion and how does one conclude this kind of an issue. So maybe in debate and discussion one can really bring that along. Now, where contextualization is concerned at a broader level, and this, of course, is what I'm saying is even before the pandemic and after the pandemic, what has continued. During the pandemic, of course, we knew things were really very, very problematic and still not recovered. But the issue is the entire debate: who is gaining and who's falling? What is the growth pattern which we have been witnessing? And does that growth pattern actually lead to an increase in employment or a decrease in employment? So this is fundamental contradiction which really exists. And I was really, of course, now it's average the last 2 years. The growth rate is about whatever the definition of the growth rate, that's another lecture by itself, which has been changing over a period of time, is 5%. But there's almost a 1/4 fall in salaried jobs. And this is something, which as an economist and of course as a practitioner, it really bothers that what kind of a growth pattern of paradigm do we have, that it is not, earlier we used to say jobless growth, but now it's become anti-jobs or anti-employment kind of a growth pattern. And this manifests itself in various kinds of ways, that wages are falling very dramatically, the real wages, keeping the inflation issues, of course, in mind, but also profits are rising. And this is something which really is quite stunning, that how does this really happen? And the fundamental, of course, is the fact that the profits can rise only when the wage bills fall. And during the pandemic, I mean, I've written a book on what really the pandemic policy response was and how it impacted. And it was really quite amazing that during the first 1.5 year of the pandemic, that manufacturing profits that is 100 top listed companies, this little research paper which I did, actually rose by 20% during the pandemic, which was really very, very surprising. And then, of course, one realizes that it's only at the cost of wages and nothing else. And you have other simultaneous processes, whether it's monetization of public assets or disinvestment, centralization of capital. I think that is something which we are witnessing at a very, very sharp level, because what it really implies, apart from a monopoly and therefore a decrease in efficiency of competition to whatever level it had existed earlier, it also implies, and this is not only private capital, but it's also the capital of the center. If you see the latest budget, which is there, it talks a lot about capex and capital expenditure, etc. But all of it is on building what is called low labor employment products, like whether it's national highways, whatever, but also that it works primarily against and replaces the kind of technology and the kind of capital which is there, replaces labor. So there is an intensification even in this anti-job or anti-employment pattern of growth. The historical pattern, generally what all countries have faced, is that there's an increase in the formal sector. But India, as a few other countries in South Asia, is that the informal sector is actually increasing over a period of time. About a decade ago, it was 83, 84% of all the workers were informal workers. Now this has exceeded about almost 94%. And this relates primarily to the rise in small enterprises, which fall in the informal sector. The number of workers, there are three processes which I've identified, and each one is linked to the other. And also what you have, that even in the formal sector, you have contractual appointments which go beyond the formal sector. I mean, I see it as an academician, and many of you who are involved in academics and research, is even in teaching. I mean, the number of contract jobs in teaching is much, much more than the regular posts which are there. And of course, the most impacted are women and transgenders. There is very, very little information on transgenders. In fact, they don't exist in any of the budget documents. We've been trying. We have pre-budget consultations I've been having with whoever listens, whether it's a Ministry of Finance or Women and Child or whatever. But there is absolutely no kind of a response. So, generally, when we talk about intersectionalities in terms of whether it's income class or assets or gender, caste, religion, ethnic groups, etc. So these are economic as well as extra economic intersectionalities. And therefore, you see the importance of something like caste data, the caste census debate, which is going on right now, and how that is related primarily to the economic component and very, very much where women are concerned. There are also many, many other kinds of inequalities which exist. And, I had listed some 38 kind, but I'm just reducing it to very few. And these are what have existed, but what are also increasing. And that's why this contextualization is important. So work participation rates, particularly for women, used to be the lowest in where India was concerned in South Asia, but now it is in all of Asia. In fact, Bangladesh, Pakistan, everyone have really overtaken us where work participation rates are concerned. Our gender gaps, whether it is caste-based gender gaps, which have increased, gender-based, which now is one of the highest gaps which exists in India, and of course, the definition of minimum wages, which we will be coming to at a later issue. Separation in terms of opportunities and accessibility to employment. And here I would like to specifically mention digitalization. And that's extremely important because of the kind of online and digital, conditionalities which have been attached beyond and outside a law in many kinds of places. For a simple example is Narega. that which we know. I don't have to explain Narega. You all know, and you know how important it is for the rural population, particularly those who fall in the poor category, which is a huge, huge amount. Is that now even Narega wages have been digitalized, and they will get their wages, whatever those little wages are, only on the condition that they do online. And therefore, what really do we talk about? Do we talk about employment or labor? Is it livelihoods? So, when we talk about labor structures, it's a very broad kind of a context, but also those basically who earn their living. And the focus here, of course, is primarily, particularly in relation to the majority of the population in terms of self-employment. I think that is a component which is very, very important. And within this, MSMEs, I think MSMEs have really not been studied at all the way they should be studied. And we know that now in the last, and they were already failing, some of them, before I'm not talking of the unicorns, which are like, 1 billion, etc., etc., but the number is just, you can count on one hand, is that almost more than two-thirds, 67 point some 7-8%, etc., of MSMEs have actually collapsed and closed down. And it's not only the issue of credit, it's also the question of sustainable livelihoods, which becomes extremely important. And that this division extends at various levels, whether it is age, it is and age becomes extremely essential, particularly where youth employment is concerned. And where the overall employment, one talks about, whether it's 5% or 6%, the unemployment rate. But if you take the youth, 19 to 25 years, the unemployment rate is 23%. It's unprecedented and the highest, I think, amongst the three highest in the world. Also, of course, you have your issue of marital status, which is not taken seriously at all, and that is single women, which becomes extremely essential. Uh, Rural-urban differentials. I'm putting the issue of migrants and trafficking very closely, because there was a law which we really fought against, which was introduced before the pandemic, about, I think, 7 years ago, it was introduced, which somehow did not make a differentiation between migrating for work and trafficking. And a large number of women, in particular from Jharkhand and from parts of Bengal and Chhattisgarh, of course, were actually arrested when they were going out for employment on the issue of trafficking, in quotes. We really fought. I mean, the ILO took a huge stand on this, but the act has been passed, and it's really creates a, I really don't know what to say, the inequality component very much so, particularly where younger women are concerned. Skilling, one talks a lot about skilling, and that this will resolve the issue. But you see the budget is only 2,300 crores for the entire skilling of the entire unskilled population in India. This is not even I think it's less than the earnings of, Jawan and Pathan, the two hit films which are there. So really, when we're talking about skilling, what really are we talking about? And of course, a lot of conditionalities. And what is very worrying, that there were already caste differences where wages and employment are concerned, of course, where tribes are concerned, but increasingly religion. And if you see the unemployment data which is there, it is the highest amongst the Muslim minority in particular. And this is something where, of course, unless we have a census, 2011, it's already 3 years after the pandemic, but we still haven't initiated the census of India, which is our basic, the lack of macro data, which we as economists and others also face, social scientists face, is something which is very, very, very difficult. And therefore, a lot of our work, we depend on APU, that is Azim Premji, we depend on CMI for data. We use, sort of dummy variables where information is concerned, to try and create some kind of a macroeconomic base where information is concerned. But this is proving to be very problematic. NSSO has been stopped. Your consumption expenditure data of 2017-18 was leaked, but it has still not been officially released as of now. And this is something which really creates a lot of, I wouldn't even say uncertainty, but in a way, certainty that situation is becoming much, much worse. And therefore, the data are not being released. There are many other concepts of contextualization. And one, I certainly, because I've been working on this for uh, almost 2 decades, that really when we talk about work, what are we talking about? And of course, income earning, it's very, very clear. Income augmenting, that is, you help to create an income. And that is, whether you're making the clay for the potter, or you are, there was this little study which I did on Kolhapuri chappals. And in Maharashtra, they're very, very famous. And I found that a majority of the designing and the cutting was done by women and by children. But they are not counted as workers at all. And of course, income saving. That is your collection of firewood and water, fuel, etc., etc. And therefore, the issues of data, of methodology, and which I mentioned earlier, is very problematic. The changing methodology which exists, so a sort of a trend analysis becomes very difficult to be able to understand. A lot of riders, etc. And this term which we keep hearing about, work from home, and this really applies to a minuscule number. And I mean, how does a Narega worker work from home? How does anyone who's involved in construction or domestic workers work from home, etc.? So when we talk about work, it's or labor, it's really a continuum. You continuously, the worker is continuously moving, man or woman or whichever religion, from paid work getting thrown out into underpaid work, because employment is so little that you're willing to take very, very low wages. And what the code does is actually reduce the wages. And this is something which I will be coming to. And that if we are to resolve the issue of inequalities or resolve the issues of unemployment, we have to realize it's a supply and demand issue. And the companies, of course, there are lots of concessions given to the corporates and various other kinds of big companies, but they can increase their profits only at the cost of wages, not in terms of expanding their sales, because the money with the households, which is a majority, 76, 70, 80% of the population, cannot afford to create a market anymore. And this is, one is your macro policy, which is reducing your demand for labor. There is also a need, a desperation. And that's why, even though there was talk of withdrawing Narega and stopping Narega, it's actually proved to be the main sucker for the rural. And there is a demand, which of course has not been acceded to, for an urban employment program, which is somewhat similar to this. So, even when we talk about unpaid labor of women, and I'd like to say here, it's not only unpaid labor of women, but also the unpaid labor. And this came out very clearly during that long walk home, when the country was, 4 hours to a lockdown. It's unforgivable in a country where 1/3 are migrants. And where we realize that single male migrants also do a lot of unpaid work. And therefore, it's, when I say gender issue, it's women and men. It's not only one, as which we know is not opposed to the other. So any kind of a resolution, including distribution of unpaid work within the household, has to be a macro result. The kind of impact which the increased price of a gas cylinder has had on the unpaid work of women and of men is, and on the health, is very, very, I think there's a lot of work which has been done on this, not enough. Partly from the pollution level, but also partly and mainly from the burden which is there, or what we call the time poverty which exists. So the resolution of these problems can only come from a macro level. It's not between, husband and wife, that you wash 3 clothes and I'll wash 3 plates. That's not the issue at all. The issue is reducing the overall burden of unpaid work. And so that you're free to work, you're free to educate yourself, if you can afford it, of course. And within this, therefore, is This is something which is, I'm sure, some you familiar over a period of time, but there are many illustrations which can come forward. I'm just taking five. And what are these laws and policies which have actually increased the inequalities between capital and between labor, and of course between men and women, between different ethnic groups, between different religious groups, etc. Demonetization, it's what, 7 years of demonetization, and all the RBI reports show that it has not been a success. A 2000 rupee note is introduced and then it is withdrawn. And I think again, this issue of giving 3 hours and 4 hours for people, there is some work which has been done on this. And when I did field work on this and wrote this little book on demonetization, I was really horrified at how the inequalities have gone up. Of course, people lost their jobs, etc., etc. But a large number, and your construction workers, your rural workers, your vendors, which constitute the majority of the workforce in the country, actually had to sell whatever little assets they had to be able to survive. And whether it was pressure cookers or it was a Mangal Sutra or whatever it was. The GST implementation, totally chaotic. Day before yesterday, not only chaotic, but the kind of, I think, red tapeism and rules which are involved in this, which the MSME, there are MSME organizations and institutions are very active on this kind of an issue, particularly the ones from Tamil Nadu and from the south, where a large number of MSMEs exist. And they have said that we will comply by every single tax rule, but please make the process simpler. The fact that you have to do it every single month, and there have been several small little studies, of course there's no macro report on this, is that how MSMEs again have declined and small enterprises have fallen because of the GST and the kind of GST implementation. Pandemic, impact of the pandemic on the economy, it's not only the pandemic, it's the kind of policy response to the pandemic. And many of us who are development practitioners working with NGOs or whichever other kinds of organizations, universities, etc., we pleaded and rationally argued that please introduce some kind, either a uniform basic income for a period of time, or free food, etc., etc., which is guaranteed under the NFSA, that is the National Food Security Act, to the country. But there are very few states which did this kind of implementation. And of course, the fact that for months, it took, I think, about 4 months for some kind of food to be delivered. But again, this was on conditionalities. You produce your Aadhaar, you produce your proof of residence, etc. And many couldn't, the migrants couldn't for a long period of time. I know we were setting up camps in Bombay and in different parts of the state where a huge number of migrants exist. And I must say there was one very good policy which the Pune Municipal Corporation performed, and they said unconditional. Don't tell us, don't show us your Aadhaar card or whatever your card conditionalities are. Just come and take the food. And this is something which really did help for a period of time. But otherwise, there was absolutely nothing. Credit was given, but credit was, there was no, what do you call, particularly to smaller enterprises. And credit was given, but it was not paid, that yes, you can pay after 2 months or 3 months, etc., etc. But the amount of credit which was given was very, very little for survival and for a very, very short period of time. We also have the illustration of the Farm Acts, on which we had the longest historical strike in the history of the world, where the farmers did. And I'm not going to the details, but what it did was again try to create monopolies within the agricultural sector through saying that you must trade with large corporations determining cultivation and crop choices, what is to be grown, how it is to be grown, irrespective of what the cultural practices or the agricultural practices were in that particular point of time. MSP, that is the minimum selling price, which is extremely important. the originator of, I think, the most sensible kind of calculation of the MSPs was done by MS Swaminathan in 2006. He passed away very, very recently. And that, what he said in 2006, has still not been implemented. That it should be, the MSCP should be 50% of the weighted average of the cost of cultivation. Of course, the fact is that government oversight has been reduced. You can't go to the judiciary anymore. You have to go to the executive or the district magistrate, etc., etc., if there is any kind. And also, what it does, it changes the prices, in particular, of products of mass consumption. And of course, here I'm talking of basically pulses, wheat, rice, which are the absolutely basic essential and form the majority, the diet of the majority, to whatever diet they can afford where this is concerned. There are there's several others, but I'm just reducing as much as I can before I come to the main issue. Of course, your FRA has been changed, your EIA has been changed, etc., etc. And now there is no environmental scrutiny for any kind of a project. In the name of infrastructure, in the name of the state, in the name of increasing manufacturing, increasing private sector jobs, etc., etc., and this very insane concept of what is called non-geographical replacement of forests. 487 hectares of thick, dense forest in Andaman and Nicobar are being cut for a port which is to be created. And as a compensation, it's not as if forests or trees are going to be planted in Andaman and Nicobar, but the permission has been given to plant them instead in Haryana. Now, what kind of a environmental sense does this really make? I'm not getting into it. You can just understand for yourself. Of course, there are many ordinances which have come and which impact the export. So it affects the agricultural sector very much so. Also, and that's why, see, the formation of the Ministry of Cooperatives is so important. And this whole issue, I think you would have dealt with Amul milk versus Nandini milk. This debate which has been taking place, and the fact that there are changes which have come, and through ordinances, not even through laws, which have come, which benefit only the organized dairy segment. And this is extremely problematic again, because if you see Lakshadweep, it's something which is very different. The economy, even in Gujarat and in many other states, where it's the majority of the poor who actually, or the unorganized sector, which is much more important in dairy creation. I'm not getting into this concept of a Aadhaar for a cow. This is, there's, I don't know how many hundreds of crores which have been allocated for providing please go on net and see the cow Aadhaar card. It's something which is, I don't want to say hilarious, but unimaginable. Now, coming to the labor codes, and there are 4 labor codes which are there. I will be dealing with each one of them, but I will deal with the code on wages in detail. And this is because it's the first. It defines the basis for all the 3 codes, for all the other codes which are there. And this has already been notified in the Gazette. And I've particularly put the years and the dates, because please remember, all these labor codes were passed. Huge opposition, which was there in the parliament, but they were all passed under what I call the camouflage of COVID, when the workers were involved in just basic physical survival, and not in any kind of, struggling for different kinds of rights which they had over a period of time. Now, what the code on wages does is that it repeals and replaces, as all the codes do, totally 4 acts which have existed: payment of wages, minimum wages, bonus, payment of bonus, and the ERA, that is your Equal Remuneration Act, which we managed to get in 76. There was a huge women's movement in the 1960s and in the 1970s. particularly the urban women's movement and the trade union movements, which fought for an Equal Remuneration Act. Now, what the code says, and I'll go into it in some detail later, but what the ERA said is that there should be same wages, same conditions of work, no gender-based wage differentials for the same amount of work. Now, this gender-based has been removed, and instead it has been written male-female. And for us, the term gender was very important because it incorporates all genders, not only male and female genders. So transgenders are out of any kind of codes, which in a way may be good, but the fact is, if there's any little kind of a benefit which is there, they do not exist. The Payment of Bonus Act, which is there, and I will be taking some of these in greater detail. Sorry, I have this crazy pollution cough which is there. Now, there's several aspects of this which I will be going into in some detail. And there is, of course, the issue of sexist language. I don't want to go into in detail. Everywhere the worker is he. And it's not a petty thing, you know. Several years ago in Mumbai, when we were fighting for workers of the airport, all right, we fought against what is called the Workmen's Act, all right. And we were told by the court that the Workmen's Act does not include women. And we had to go to court again and prove that workmen in a generic term includes work women. You know, so that's why these terms become absurd. So in a way, it's a regression, the kind of sexist language. I'm not going to illustrations because everywhere you go, it's exactly the same. I will take some time in detailing, particularly the how workers are defined, who is included and who is excluded from any definition. And if you're included from the definition of being a worker, you're excluded from every other so-called benefit which is to be given. There are various others. I'm not reading out, of course, the PPTs. We take each one of them as it comes. Now, what the code says is that a worker is one who works, one second, one who works in an establishment or an industry. So what it does, it leaves out all private households where work is carried on. Okay. And it says that this code will not apply. The code on wages will not apply where 5 or less workers are employed. And just by this definition, when I was hunting for material of how many people and what sectors are most impacted by saying wherever 5 and less workers are employed, they will not be under a benefit of any kind of a code, I was horrified to find that of agricultural establishments, which an increasing proportion of our population is dependent on now, given the decline in urban jobs, 98.6 agricultural establishments are out of the definition of work, worker, and workplace. This also omits and denies worker status to all apprentice, all your gig and platform workers, though it is said that there's going to be a separate act for gig workers. Domestic workers out, and domestic workers are not. It's the only area. There are 2 sectors where employment of women is increasing. Domestic workers, which is now even in rural areas, 12% of the workers are domestic workers. Okay. And these are defined by law as regular salaried workers, which itself is a very problematic definition. Domestic workers out, home-based workers out because they work from home, scheme-based workers. And this includes not only the ASHA and the Anganwadi workers and the Narega workers, it also excludes auxiliary nurses. And this is something we thought with what happened during the pandemic and the way the nurses and the doctors and assistant nurses worked and how many of them passed away, that some kind of a compensation in terms of benefits would be given to them, but they're out. scheme-based workers. There's this very uh, cynical category, there's no other word I can think of, which does not define, like Asha and Anganwadi workers are not defined as workers. They are defined as volunteers, okay? And therefore they do not come. There is a category of scheme-based workers, and there are these very insane categories, which is called sakhis. Most of them are women. So you have somebody who's looking after livestock or implementing a livestock scheme, is called a pashu sakhi. Okay, there's a bank sakhi, there is a paid sakhi, and none of them are defined. And these, remember, at a final level, are all supposedly government employees. All of them out, absolutely out. At a minimal calculation, 100 million workers are out, apart from the agricultural sector, out of the definition of workers under the code on wages. Hours of work, 8 hours, which now has become 9 hours. Okay, 9 hours officially announced, 8 hours plus 1 hour of rest. Under what is called emergency work, that is, if an export component or an export product has to be sent on time or produced on time, the employer can ask for 12 hours or even 16 hours of work. UP and Gujarat were the two states which wanted 16 hours of work for a worker on a daily basis. And luckily, the Supreme Court cut it down. But 12 now is the absolute minimum. Many states which have come out with their draft codes have given 12 as they. Now, you just see 12. Earlier, 24 divided by 8 means 3 shifts of workers. Now, with even 12, it means your one shift of workers has totally gone. So that total loss of labor to that huge broad extent which exists. Payment of bonus. Of course, earlier there was a methodology which was given. Now that methodology is gone. It's as and when executive defines what bonus is to be given, if it is to be given at all. The calculation of minimum wages. I'll take at least 10 minutes more. I'm sorry. Yeah, it's just the contextualization took so long. I'm really very sorry. And the minimum wages, now what has been defined as a minimum wage is the calories and the cloth, etc., etc. I've already, it's all that. Even the meters of cloth per household has been reduced from 72 meters to 66 meters. Okay, and various other levels which exist. Now you see the bias which is already there, which is contained in this definition of minimum wages. One meal is one full consumption unit of 2,700 calories. A woman, 20% less. Okay? Actually, with the kind of unpaid work she does, she needs, if not more, at least equal. Children, 6, that is 60% of 2,700 calories. The Parliamentary Standing Committee had recommended that don't make it 3 consumption units, make it 3.6 consumption units, because a child is not defined. The child can also be 14 and 15, which is of working age, not accepted. Of course, there's nothing. We thought that we learned from the pandemic policy, the importance of mobile and internet. Nothing is included. And what is the minimum floor level wage? The government committee, the parliamentary committee, said 375 a day, but the labor minister says no, 178 rupees a day for survival. Now, this, I'm not even getting into how many people will get it, but if they come under the code, whatever few are left to come under the code, should get this, not will get this, should get this. And of course, this has a very clear bias of 2-child norm. And what about those who are adopted, who are, dependents in terms of physically, mentally disabled, etc., etc. There is what is called a rest day. But this, you see, the calculation is actually an unpaid rest day. All right. First of all, the rest day should normally be on Sunday, but the employer can change. The worker will be given a rest day only if he works 6 days continuously with that one employer. But we know how breaks are given, particularly in the formal sector. Your Honda case study is very much clear in front of you. And it keeps talking about a monthly wage. And you see how the definition of a monthly wage is calculated. It is daily wages into 26 days. It should be daily wage into 30 days. All right. That is the proper definition, which means that the rest day which you're getting, you're not really going to be paid for in that sense of the term. And the benefit, of course, goes to the employer and does not go to the worker at all. There is a huge category of skilled and unskilled, and a lot of it does not make sense. When you say cattle man, there's no cattle woman. All right. When we know that 70% of dairying and livestock is carried out by women. Now, the point here, and I've just given these few definitions. I tried hunting for what is a beater woman, and all I get on Google is woman beater. So there's no definition of who is what. Now, what we're saying here, defined by economic activity, if you're talking about equal wages, then it should be the activity. It should be like what they've written, number 10, which I've taken, Mazdoor, male, female. Again, see, the other gender has been left out. And messenger. Now, that's not my spelling mistake. That's the way it is there in the code of wages. But these 681 skill sets, nowhere is domestic workers are defined as skilled or unskilled. And that is where I said a large number of women are involved. You have the worker form, which is there, or your PAN card, and you see how it includes, that is for your fines, etc., etc. So there is name of employer, there's name of the owner, but the worker has no name. It is only identification number. So in a way, it's making the worker totally faceless, and as if the worker exists only as a number and not as a human being. Of course, there is no column for gender, even male, female doesn't exist. There's father's name, spouse's name, which again is something which the Supreme Court has ruled against, but this doesn't seem to be working out at all. There are within this other aspects which I will just run through, and this is very, very, very essential, is that are the working conditions going to exist properly or not, and who is to check them? Now, the name labor inspector has been changed to inspector cum facilitator for production. So, which means that when you are, these are labor codes. These are supposed to give workers rights, labor rights, but in fact, it's being taken away. No physical examination of the work site which exists. It can be done only online, web. Self-certification of compliance by employers. I found this, I really don't know what words to use for this. When we have to prove our citizenship by proving our documents of 3 generations and 4 generations online under the CAA and the NRC, etc., etc., all the employer has to do and say, yes, I am complying. And of course, there are many other forms of dilution in terms of no representatives of workers' organizations, no inclusion of women. Where women were to be included, their proportion has been reduced from half, which again came from a huge struggle which we all had, to 1/3 representation. And in relation to this also are the other codes, which I'm just running through really very fast. Occupational, what is called COSH, and in COSH, which is repeals 13 acts. And here I just want to say about only one or two at a particular point of time. I'm not going to discuss each in detail. Your Plantations Labor Act. All right. Now, what the Plantations Labor Act had said, that housing subsidy in particular should be provided by the management. What this code says is that housing subsidy will not be provided by the management, will be provided by the panchayats. So you're, in a way, removing whatever was due from the employers and putting it on the tax, which is due from all of us, and putting it in terms of our cost. interstate migration, etc., etc. There are various other examples where come. BD workers, of course, most important, the historic struggles of Nepani, and where they got housing, they got that no deduction in terms of wrongful taking away of product, etc., etc. Bonus, welfare of children, all this has been removed. The Social Security Act is something which is really quite amazing because it replaces 15 existing laws, all right, removes the Maternity Benefit Act. Please note, the earlier social security, the cost component, when we talk about occupational safety, it deletes any references to sexual harassment at workplace. Okay, totally out of the picture. Maternity benefit out of the picture. All cesses and all welfare funds have been banned. Okay, they have been stopped. And this again is something what workers got after a very long period of time. And this money is the workers' money. They put in 2% or 5%, whatever is decided, and the employer has to put in 2 or 5%. And this is for the welfare, which their unions distribute and which they decide, whether it's for education or health, etc., etc. All these were banned, and somehow the unkindest cut of all was that they were the main one, that is Bakwa, the construction workers, was banned on Gandhi Jayanti. And this is somehow, very, I really don't know what to say where this is concerned. Of course, there is no social security scheme which is put. It says very clearly that social security schemes as and when may be decided, not will be decided. Okay. So then again, there's nothing which replaces, it's all which takes away. And of course, your industrial relations, which controls any kind of an opposition or a struggle by workers. Trade Union Industrial Employment Act. Remember Trade Union Act 1926 and how much B.B. Giri, he was our first president and our second, and one of the strongest labor leaders, that all these have been removed. And now even a casual day's leave has to be cleared by the tribunal. You cannot go on strike unless the tribunal agrees. Because, and I think the purpose of the labor codes is very clearly summed up in this one simple statement, which says that the labor codes seek to improve the business environment in the country by reducing labor compliance burden of industries. All right, I think that really sums up that what are these labor codes for? Are they for ease of doing business, or are they to protect the labor rights? And of course, the issue of recognition of trade unions is a whole lot of material which is there on this within the code itself. And I think that just that one sentence, that a trade union needs 51% of the workers' recognition, of workers' votes to be recognized, that itself, I think, is a debate for another 2 hours. So, lot more to say, but I will stop here.
Thank you, Professor Dewan. This was really wonderful, excellent presentation that really laid out for us the uh, magnitude of the challenge. There are 7 questions. I think some of them may be similar. So I'll read them out, and then you can maybe decide, either take them one by one or together. So the first question is if there is growth, wouldn't it be reasonable to expect that given enough time, the economy will eventually create more jobs? So I don't know, would you like to go? Then the next question says, you said you are rethinking, romanticizing the past. Are you saying structural transformation of the economy should be stopped or reversed?
Actually, these two questions are quite linked, because, one is this issue of enough time. I think there's more than enough time. And this long term never seems to end where workers are concerned. And as you can see at every level, you see any kind of data which is there, that the situation is getting worse by the day. In terms of wages, in terms of poverty line, um, there is, so the second question is that of structural transformation. Now, it's a structural transformation is against the majority citizens of the country. Should it not be reversed? Should it not be questioned? And should it not be dealt with? Like I said, again, I'm not saying that earlier the situation was much, much better, but certainly trade unions had much more right in terms of demonstrating, in terms of fighting, in terms of struggling, etc., etc. You just see the Air India workers and what has happened to them. And that serves as a perfect illustration of the structural transformation and the long-term growth. Okay, one is the disinvestment component. Now, who it went to, how much it went for is one issue. But what also went, apart from the planes and the brand of Air India, all the land on which the housing colonies were built, which runs into at least 10 to 12 acres of land in the heart of Mumbai. You can imagine the value of that, which has not been calculated in the 2000 odd crores which was there. Also, this kind of a deal did not involve the re-employment or the payment of dues to any of the workers. Any of the workers who'd been in Air India for many, I'm not even talking of contract, I'm talking of regular kinds of workers. So, if the structural transformation is something which goes against, I think one needs to reverse. And secondly, how long are people going to wait? I mean, how long should one wait? How can growth pick up when the basic of economics is that unless there is demand for products, companies will not produce. You just see the latest data which comes out. Which are the products which are selling hugely? All right, your Mercedes, luxury holidays, 99-inch TVs, but certainly what are not selling are cycles, are not selling are even small products like biscuits. All right, people cannot afford to buy a packet of 10 biscuits. They're buying a packet of 5 biscuits. All right, your consumption, unless your demand is more democratic and widespread, which means people have to have money in their hands, no amount of corporate concessions or any kind of GST rules or tax reliefs, etc., is going to resolve and increase growth, including of manufacturing. In fact, the only sector which grew during COVID, in spite of everything which went against it, including a huge burden of migrants who came back with demonetization, who came back with the pandemic, is the agricultural sector, which in fact has got the least amount in budget allocations over a long period of time. The next questions.
Yeah, the next question is with artificial intelligence. Will artificial intelligence affect labor in India given large number of population that is in informal sector?
Yeah, certainly it would. In fact, we had a huge international conference on this just a few weeks ago. But what does it, which sectors? I mean, labor is not a homogeneous category and workers are not homogeneous. So who is it going to replace and which categories is it going to replace? It cannot replace construction workers, but capital intensive technology can certainly replace. Okay, so where do we take AI? In fact, I see artificial intelligence impacting research work. You know, there was something we wanted to do exactly on this. Someone, the Niti Aayog, they were asked to present a paper on impact of AI on labor. And what he did, that person who came did was he was very intelligent. He put this question to chat GP, and the response which came and the research article which came from AI was brilliant. It was actually something where, you know, our entire policy could be based on. So is it going to replace academicians? Is it going to replace policymakers? But certainly physical labor, it cannot. but do we not want it? I mean, it's not a question of opposing. It's like saying, no, refuse computers and bring back typists because it employs more work. But that's not the point at all. But it will affect very, very differently at different levels.
Thank you, Professor. There is another question. What about Kuznets' inverted U curve? Should we wait for inequalities to come down? I think to some extent you've addressed this, but I don't know if you want to.
Yeah, but when inequalities are being institutionalized and increased, I mean, how will they come on their own? Unless those who are unequal are just wished out of existence. So it's not only the old ones which are reinforced, but new ones which are being created. So they're not going to come down by praying or magic or anything.
There's a request for you to share the
Oh,
presentation. Maybe
sure, of
if
course.
you
All
share it
knowledge
with
is
me, then I can
public.
forward
Yes,
it.
yes.
2, 3 participants have asked for this.
Surely. I'll certainly
Then
do that.
there is another comment. What an extraordinary talk. My question is, does it mean during COVID, teachers who work with half salary could not claim their salary later?
I don't know about teachers, but not in India. I mean, unless they were contractual, which is a huge percentage. But regular tenure posts, of course, got their salaries. But none of the contractual teachers, they were, not even half salary for a period of time. But there are many who didn't get. I mean, your whole domestic worker sector. I mean, they were asked as if they were the ones who were causing COVID spread. And you remember the way the migrants were, sprayed with chemicals. How inhuman can we be when we know it came via planes? I mean, I'm not saying the rich are to blame or whatever, but it was what is called a natural disaster in that sense of the term. But to blame is okay. Is social and economic mobility possible for marginalized and poor informal? Social mobility, not at all. Economic mobility, not when your wages are decreasing. You take the inflation rate, it's one of the highest. And when I say inflation rate, please see the inflation rate, what we call the CPI, Consumer Price Index, for basic commodities, for what is called IW and AL, that is industrial workers and agricultural laborers. And you see how economic mobility is very, very problematic. What is happening is physical mobility in terms of migration, but that has also really come down. And how does a person escape the intergenerational poverty trap? I don't know. It's becoming more and more difficult because the one greatest hurdle of economic mobility is health and health infrastructure. And one single episode of health can bring you down several levels on the economic ladder. And I think, again, you see the health infrastructure closed down, primary health centers closed down to make way for what is called district health centers. So you have to travel, 200-300 kilometers to be able to access, and all this in the name of rationalization. I mean, Maharashtra, it's really 1,600, 16,000 primary schools have been closed down, all right, on the issue that there has to be at least 15 students. But when you're on a hilly area and you're far away, you cannot access, which means all those students are out. During the same period when 16,000 schools were closed down, 17,000 liquor shops opened. All right. Now, I am not against liquor at all by any chance, but I'm talking of priorities and where does one go where, economic mobility is concerned.
Then there is a question. Thank you for the most critical analysis of the labor codes. I wonder if the declining female labor force participation will improve with some changes. I would like your opinion on this, please.
I don't know if it'll improve. It can improve only at a broad macro level. In fact, it's reduced, it's thrown out a large number of women from being defined as workers. So what will now the new female labor force participation, how will we calculate it? Are ASHA workers calculated in that? Are domestic workers calculated in that? Because they're not workers, okay, according to the new laws. So, female labor or labor force participation, including of female, is only when demand increases. But all factors is where demand for labor is actually declining. Somebody wants to see the conclusion slide.
I think we'll share the power,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
point with
Because the
them.
conclusion slide, basically, I tried to work out from the argument is that there's not enough revenue and there's not enough money for social security. And people like us, we argue for universalization of social security. So I do a lot of budget analysis. So it was, based on the budget that there is so much of money available. And point is where you want to use it. So
There is one question about trade unions.
uh,
How to ensure trade unions don't get taken over by those who want political leadership, leading to shutting down of factories like happened in Mumbai and Indore. I think Indore is, I mean, we've seen that in the 80s, 90s. So how does one make sure the movement doesn't get co-opted by
I think that's
vested
up to
interests?
the workers. And also the workers realize where you can get your demands fulfilled, And that's why I think with the kind of money power controlling these days, which has never been so much, is it might become difficult. But I'm more worried about whether trade unions are going to exist or not, or they'll become management unions with that 51% clause which is there.
There is a question from Suhas Kolekar who says, with your brilliant analysis, would you please be able to give some suggestions that we could put as suggestions for improvement in employment policies in People's Manifesto for the national election?
Oh, please, I think you draft one and we'll take one and just insist that every political party includes it in its manifesto. But I think there's free trips to temples, which is being promised, and various other kinds of issues. So whether they're interested in workers' issues at all are. But I think it's important. I mean, we've just brought out a paper on housing policy in Maharashtra because it's something which is very, very disastrous. And no harm. I think one can only try and publicize. So maybe one can draft, and of course, I will help you, and there are many others who will help you on this.
Thank you so much, Professor Diwan. One last question from my side. Um, uh, so, do you see any green shoots of hope in this rather somber kind of landscape which we see in India with regard on the question of labor? In other words, there is the state, and we clearly see limitations in the way policies are being drafted, but are there other sectors where which give us reason for hope that change can come? What can the citizen do? I think also this last question seems to be uh, hinting at that.
Yeah, a lot, I think, a huge amount, what can be done. And I think there's a lot to learn from the farmers' struggles. All right, huge amount to learn because it's not only opposition. There was a, a very analytical, I mean, and that's what we need to do, analysis of the issues and present an alternative. I think, we keep whining, but we don't say what is needed. We say what is wrong, but what is needed is something which is not talked about. So I think, there are many green shoots, there are many trees. It's not only green shoots which are there everywhere. So you have a huge number of people who are coming together, not only on the farm issue, but gig workers unions, which have been formed, There is also, I think there are two laws which have been passed by the Rajasthan government, which are very important. One is the gig and the welfare, where it's not ideal for sure. There's a lot of criticism on it. But the point is, there is something to take away from that. So, workers, women, very much so. I mean, we've tried, but there's no one to listen. I'd been doing pre-budget consultations for the ministry for 2 decades or 3 decades now. And right now, there's just no one to listen. They don't turn up. Somebody's gone to Manara, somebody's gone somewhere else. But the point is, one has to continue. And if they don't, then put it in the public domain and create a thing. I mean, that's what media works against, but also social media works for. And I think we just have to use a whole lot of new tactics and new strategies. We have a whole lot of online signature campaigns, etc., which may not give us so much as, say, an actual physical demonstration of movement which is there. But there are many new ways which are being out. I think COVID, particularly in Bangalore, the way the transgenders struggled against what was happening and their movements, I think, which came out was really something. A lot to learn from that.
Thank you, Professor Dewan, for this excellent analysis. You really spanned quite a vast canvas in this relatively short period of time, and I'm sure it has left all of us with more clarity about this very important issue and a better understanding, which can then serve as a surer ground from which to begin to carry out the kind of analysis and activism which can help advance the movement towards change. Friends, thank you for those who have joined us on Facebook and through this Zoom platform. The recording of this lecture will be posted on our YouTube channel, and it will be made available to the wider public. We will also share since many of you have requested for a copy of the PowerPoint presentation, we will share it with you by email.
Okay, I'll send it to you just now.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. And thank you for the questions, because there's a lot to learn from questions. We may not have all the answers, but I think asking the right questions is very, very important. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Professor. Hope to collaborate with you again sometime in the future. Thank you.
Thank you.